The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Love news but find keeping up a bit overwhelming? Well, Newsable is the answer. It's your daily fix of everything worth talking about. I'm your host, Imogen Wells, and in about 15 minutes, I'll bring you what you need to know from Aotearoa and around the world and explain why it matters. Newsable tackles the big stuff without taking itself too seriously. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spin-off with help from Callaghan Innovation. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
On September 4, 2010, when just 15 years old, Jake Millar's life changed forever. His father and 4 close friends died in a skydiving plane crash. Prime Minister John Key visited the scene and Jake wrote to thank him. A handwritten note reply came for the Prime Minister, who wanted to meet him, away from the media. And as someone who had also lost a father young and gone on to great success, Jake credits this meeting with John Key and his example as part of what's led him to go on and do what he's done. And what a lot of that there is already. Always entrepreneurial, Jake became driven. He set goals and got them. Head boy of school and house, check. He landed a $40,000 scholarship and then rather than take it, he took advice from a book by Sir Richard Branson that said, "Screw it, let's do it." And he gave it a miss and started a company that months later he was in the works of selling to the New Zealand government. His second venture, Unfiltered, sees him travelling the world, spending most of his time in North America, talking to business leaders about how they succeed and selling that wisdom to people and great companies all over the place. It's going great guns and backed with serious investment. He's even interviewed Sir Richard Branson. At 22, he's just getting started but already giving back. In New Zealand doing fundraising for Lifeline, raising $55,000 the other day with a charity dinner. To talk career, what it takes to succeed, and giving back right from the get-go, Jake Millar joins us now. G'day, Jake.
Thank you, Simon. It's great to be here.
Hey, thanks so much for coming along. Tell me about the effect of John Key, Sir John Key now, and how that helped to spur you to be driven.
Yeah, well, after my father died in a plane crash in Fox Glacier in 2010, and after that happened, I remember John Key visited the crash site and paid his respects, and, Fox Glacier is a tiny little town with 12,000, probably about actually 1,200 people, on the west coast of the South Island, extremely remote. And the Prime Minister, I believe he flew into Greymouth and drove for about 3 hours in his Crown car down to Fox Glacier, visited the crash site and all the way back to Greymouth before he flew back to Wellington. And I remember just being like, man, for him to take that time out to go and do that was very, very, very good of him. And I just wrote him a letter just saying, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to visit the crash site and pay your respects. And he wrote back and said, he wanted to have lunch, which was amazing. And next time he was in Greymouth, it just so happened he was coming into Greymouth quite a lot at the time because of the Pike River disaster. And he came into Greymouth and came out to our house, and we sat for about an hour and a half and had whitebait sandwiches and a bit of a chat about sort of what my goals were at the time. And, just no media were invited. He was extremely, it was an extremely humbling moment, and he was obviously a very humble person. And I was really grateful for his influence and, the time he gave me in the early days.
And he also having lost a father at a young age, which could be such a setback for someone's entire life, but not in the case of what either of you have made of it.
Yeah, I think, when something like that happens, you have a choice, and the choice is either, to let it truly get you down and I guess, not move forward. And the other choice is to learn from it and I guess move forward and, go forward and truly try and achieve your goals. And I say choice, that might not be quite accurate, because sometimes, people cope with things in different ways. And I know for me, of course, it was very hard, but at the same time, I remember, I was so driven to get our family business back up and running. I wanted to make sure the skydiving business started up again. I wanted to, really, really help with that and get our first customers sort of back in the air doing their first skydive. So I know for me, it definitely had an effect where I became even more ambitious, I would say, and more goal driven. And it definitely was a result of, people's influence, particularly John Key, sort of seeing him, come to the West Coast and truly help people who were going through a pretty difficult time. That definitely got me pretty inspired in those days.
And you were able to get the business back up and going, because it was the family business, was it?
It was, yeah. And we did. I think it was about a month to the day after it happened, we did our first skydive load, and we took about 4 people up and got it back up and running. The business was sold 1 year to the day after the plane crash.
And at the same time as you had all this happening from the age of 15 onwards, you also were the Board of Trustees rep at your school. You were working towards being the head boy of the school and your house. And then you also got a scholarship to law school. So having achieved all of those goals, a $40,000 scholarship, what did everyone say when you decided not to take it?
I remember I was like so torn, because it's such a generous offer, and you get something like this, and it's a once in a lifetime thing, obviously. But I read the Richard Branson book, and that was just so powerful for me. It's hard to explain how powerful that was, but it was way more powerful than any scholarship could be. I remember if that scholarship had been $100,000, it wouldn't have mattered. $150,000, $200,000, I still would have turned it down. I was so determined to go out and start my first business that the amount of money it was almost irrelevant at that point. And I rang up the Dean of Law with that mindset, thinking, man, I know what I want to do, but it's a hard decision. And he gave me some amazing advice. I'll never forget. He said, if you want to go and start a business, I recommend, every young person, goes out, follows their passion, follows their dreams, and, gives it a go. And he said, in 3 years, if things don't work out, you can always give me a call, and I'm sure, the door will always be open. So amazing guy who gave me great advice. We keep in touch today. We send each other a Christmas card every year, and, amazing guy.
That's so wonderful. And when you were looking to start this business, so you were absolutely sure, to the point of turning down hundreds of thousands, you would start a business. Did you know what business you were going to start?
No, had no idea. I literally had no idea. And I remember, and that was probably why my mum was so upset. I remember she pretty much lost it at me. She had just invested, 4 years of boarding school, which was pretty expensive, and, thought that I was making the silliest decision of my life. Rightly so, because I had no idea, no capital, no vision, no clue. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to start a business. So I remember, I think we were up in Auckland at the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert or something, in January of, 2000 and, it would have been like December 2013. And I remember I was lying on the bed in the hotel room, and I just was trying to think of ideas and just trying as hard as I could. I was like, I need an idea. And, that was sort of where Unfiltered came from, my first business. And I went back to Christchurch and got started. And yeah.
Tell me about Unfiltered. What was it, and how did you make that happen?
Yeah, so when I was at Christchurch Boys, I'd been running a speakers program. So I'd been inviting inspirational speakers into the school to talk to the students and help inspire them to sort of go and achieve their dreams. And in the 18 months that we ran that in Christchurch, I invited the likes of who all attended. John Key, Helen Clark, Mahi Drysdale, Rhys Darby, Rob Fife, Christopher Luxon. So we're talking like the most successful kind of tier one, business people, sports people, politicians, of the day, who all made the time to come into Christchurch Boys, the school in the South Island, and talk to the students. And I remember thinking, this was a really powerful experience. And if we could digitalize that kind of experience for students all over the country, no matter where they are, that would be, a great resource. And I didn't really think about the business model too much, but I wanted to basically allow or give the most successful people a platform to share their advice and talk about if they were 18 years old today, how would they get started? Because obviously the world's, very different today than when all these people were 18. So I talked to the top celebrity chefs, actors, news anchors, politicians, sports people, business people, a whole range of people. Just literally that was sort of the overall theme of the interview. If you were 18, how would you get started? What would you do differently? What have you learnt? And then just tried to distribute that content into as many schools as possible around the country. And, the business model was that it was funded by sponsors. So I went out and sort of started knocking on the doors. And I remember I had a mentor in Christchurch called Steve Brooks, and he said, it's a stupid idea, don't do it. No, it's never going to make money. And I love Steve because he always gives me the most raw and authentic advice. And I said, I think I can make this work. And he said, no, it's not going to make any money. He said, you need to ring 5 companies by the end of the day and see whether they would sponsor this. And if they if they do, then you've got a business. So I started ringing companies, and I rang companies, and I finally found some that would sponsor it, and they said that they would. So I made a start on it.
That's amazing. And from taking that idea of distributing kind of like life advice to people moving forwards, how did you then take that and sell it to the New Zealand government? Because that's quite a skill to come so early in a business.
Yeah, I mean, so I started working on the business in January 2014, and we launched in July 2014. So that was the time when we were sort of behind the scenes, filming the first content, building the website, getting everything up and running, launched the business, and then only probably 2 months after launch, I flew up to Wellington to have a meeting with the CEO of Careers New Zealand, who I was introduced to, which is a crown entity of the New Zealand government, and was literally just wanting to open a discussion about how Careers New Zealand help us distribute the content into the schools, because that's their job, right, is career advice for young people. And we had a meeting, and we got on really well, and I think it was at our second meeting when we were talking about it, and I flew to Wellington, and we were getting quite serious in terms of what this might look like, and a partnership, and a big partnership, and I just said, well, why I just remember very clearly, I just looked at them and said, why don't you guys buy this and do it yourselves? It would make more sense to integrate this into what you do. And he just said, I've never really thought about that. Oh, that's interesting. And I said, yeah. Well, and then from that moment on, literally all we talked about was that. And it was about a 6-month negotiation to get to where we got to. But that was kind of, that was a tipping point in terms of that discussion. And from that, we worked out that, he went away and talked to his people, and they worked out that was, not a bad idea. And I went away and thought about it and thought, that's actually quite a good idea, and decided to sell to them. So that's kind of where it all started.
And was it a big exit? Was it I suppose for someone who was 17, 18, any kind of number is probably quite big then.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I had a great mentor in Christchurch called Jeff Cranko, and we were talking about the number that we wanted, and it was a good number, and he said, if we can get this, it will be a really good result. And I said, yeah, that's a good point, and we ended up getting over double that. So it was, obviously it's being the government and so on, it was undisclosed, and I'm not sort of meant to talk about it too much, but let's just say it set me up very well to sort of go away and take a lot of time off and set my next business up and take a lot of stress off the plate. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And what did your mum say when that all came to be?
She was obviously really happy, really proud. I went over to the US immediately after and spent about 6 weeks just traveling around, having like my dream holiday over the US, and just really thinking about the next steps. And it was an amazing moment. I always think now that you might have kind of 5 of these moments in your life when you finish something and you're about to start something else. And those moments for me are something that, they're amazing moments. You do have time to reflect and think and learn and read and all of that good stuff.
What kind of things did the first business teach you? Because you've gone on, we'll chat about Unfiltered in a minute, what you went on to do. They say success is a terrible teacher, but that is it's pretty unprecedented that someone can spin up an idea, get in touch with 135 high-profile people in the country, get all of them to agree to have an interview, put it together, make it into a website, get a meeting with the boss of a government entity, sell it to them, and then be sitting there on a pile of future investable cash at the age of 19 and then go, what do I do next? So that's a huge success.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely... I look back now and, I definitely didn't expect anything else from myself, if that makes sense, because I was so determined to make this work after everybody telling me what a stupid decision I was making, turning down that scholarship, that, to me, it probably just seemed like, I was always working towards something like this. And I remember when I started Umfa, I had these ambitions in terms of, what it would ultimately become, and I wanted to build this $1 billion company, as every young person does. But so probably the first lesson I learned is that you actually have to solve a good problem, like a painful problem that people have, and wrap an amazing business model around that. And I think if people are willing to, if it saves people time and money, they'll pay for it. And I know Umfa, although it was a cool idea and it helped people, it definitely wasn't going to be the kind of business you're going to commercialize and build a good model out of it. So I think when I worked that out, that was when I was quite interested in selling it, because the first lesson I learned in business is, are you solving a problem? Are people going to pay for this? Is there a market for it? And for what I was doing, of course there was a market, but the students who are 17 years old in school, they're never going to pay for that kind of content. So that was when I worked out that I wanted to move on and do something a bit different. But I think what I always say to any entrepreneur is, I think the most important thing is, I come back to that, solve a painful problem in a specific market. Because if the market's specific as well, you can go and, literally talk to people who are, let's say it's lawyers. You can bring up every lawyer in the country and be like, I'm building this artificial intelligence platform for lawyers. This is how much it's going to cost. Can I come and meet with you? Can I, seek your advice? And, I think that's a really, really good way to start, because then you can do this market research almost in the background before you actually commit, work out, do people actually want this? Because so many people go out and they build these businesses and build these ideas, and they come up with an idea for the next Facebook in the shower, and then they invest everything they've got in 2 years of time and then get it to market, and then no one wants it. And then you're like, shit, what did I do that for? So I think find out whether someone wants it and they're going to pay for it first.
And how did that feed into what you decided to do next? So you took some time, sort out, had a look at some ideas, kind of met some people, talked to some people. What led you to set up Unfiltered, and what was it?
Yeah, well, when I came back from the US, where I'd been sort of on the 6-week vacation, I was over there looking at an idea in the food tech startup of all things. And I had this idea, and I'd interviewed Eric Watson, and he said, look, I really like this idea. I think it's great. And he knew I was going to New York, and I'd only met him 4 days ago, and he said, do you have a place to stay? And I said, no. He said, we can stay at my apartment. So I rocked up to, Eric Watson's apartment 4 days after I met him in New York, and stayed there for 5 weeks with his son, who was my age, who became one of my closest friends. And we went and door-knocked restaurants in New York, literally doing this kind of market research and just door-knocking as many restaurants as possible, saying, would you pay for this? Would you use this? And the feedback we got was overwhelmingly that the food tech space was just incredibly crowded, and it was, in New York they were just getting so many requests and so many different platforms, and they didn't really have capacity. So I came back to New Zealand, and at that time I had a library of about 15 or 20 kind of interviews that I'd filmed that weren't part of Umfa, but were sort of more part of a business education series that I'd been working on. And I had this content, but I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. I knew I wanted to publish it somewhere because they were great interviews. So I was negotiating with a couple of major media companies at the time about just selling them the content. But I remember feeling a little bit uneasy about that, because these people had given me their time to produce this new series, and I didn't just want to flog it off to Fairfax or NZ or whoever. So I came back and I was thinking, what am I really passionate about? And I remember with Umfa, although we covered every sector from politics to arts to entertainment, the main section that I was most passionate about was definitely entrepreneurs and business. And I remember thinking that there's just a gap for really good business education, that learning business fast from the best business people in the world. There's obviously books everywhere and content everywhere, but breaking this content up into really digestible chunks of business knowledge, I remember thinking there's a gap for that. So anyway, I talked to a lot of people in the market as sort of whether they would pay for this, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. And then we were looking at a way to build a good business model around it, and decided that we would also need kind of corporate partners, and we would also need a model for that. So I went out and started talking to these companies, and also thought we could sell Unfiltered as a learning and development tool to companies as well. So let's say PwC signs up, all of their staff get access, and then they get access to hundreds of these videos of the top entrepreneurs talking about building businesses and their lessons. So I literally went out and started selling to these companies before we even built it, and said, this is what I'm going to build, would you pay for this? And I think we sold about 12 companies. They bought memberships. I know Russell McVeigh was an early one, PwC, McKinsey, some amazing companies, NZTE, these companies all bought, memberships, and that sort of gave me a lot of confidence to go out, invest some money into it, and get started.
When let's say you get on the phone to McKinsey and company, and you say, hello people, I have a product that doesn't exist, which is interviews with mainly New Zealand business people. Would you pay a membership for all of your people to access this content that doesn't exist? And they, who are a company that kind of trades in research and the ability to kind of like analyze things, they just say, sure. How does that go? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, I remember I had quite a funny meeting with McKinsey, because I met with the CEO in New Zealand, and I was talking about the price point. At that stage, we had no idea what to charge for this. And I was thinking, for a company that's 0 to 50 staff, maybe $1,000 a year or something like that. So we weren't thinking huge amounts of money at that stage. And I went and had a discussion with him, and I was like, so it's going to be about $995. And he's like, okay, cool. And he's like, so per person? I was like, oh no, that's for the year. And he was like, oh, okay, that's totally fine. And he was about to sign for per person $1,000, and they had about 50 people in New Zealand. And I was like, damn, that was an expensive mistake. But to answer the question, I think when I went out, I was very prepared in terms of what we were going to build, and I know I had a very in-depth kind of the equivalent of an investment deck, but a sales sort of proposal where I had the photos of all these interviewees I'd done. I had the product. So I was literally, I mentioned the 20 or so interviews I had. We edited it down to, 5-minute videos, which showed, some of the best bits of advice. And we got the platform mocked up so we could take in, screenshots and say, this is exactly what we're building. This is how it's going to work. If you're an early adopter, this is what you get. So we made it very real to them. And, obviously track record's always helpful. So they had just seen that I built and sold this business. So they're like, okay, he's probably going to deliver on this. And, the fact that, I think I was 21 years old at the time, or 20 years old. The fact that, actually I was 19 at the time. The fact that I was 19 didn't actually really matter because they could see exactly what I'd done before.
In fact, was it a door opener? Was it, you've got to meet this young person who's really dynamic and, not your average fellow?
Yeah, definitely a door opener, I think. I think in business, I've definitely found that being young has been really, really helpful. There's few times in business where it hasn't been, People want to meet you if you're young and you're ambitious and you've got this idea and, they get excited about that. And I know in my early days, certainly a lot of doors were open because of that. If I think about the, 400 odd interviews I've done now with, some amazing people around the world, I don't think I would have gotten many of those if I sort of was knocking on the door going, hey, this is what I'm doing. I've got this idea, and I'm 40 years old. Let's just say, I don't think I would have got the early interviews because the whole dream was built around, helping young people. And I think that was really powerful. In saying that, I think over time that becomes less of a factor. Track record then, becomes the most important thing, and age is kind of becomes a lot less relevant.
And how did you take this idea of Unfiltered, that you started out with the kind of corporate sponsorship to the corporate purchasing to know that it was going to solve a problem for these businesses? How did you then take that and scale it and grow it?
Well, the first thing we did is, so we worked really hard on building an amazing platform that was, that people really wanted to use and had amazing content on it. And then probably to scale it, what we did is just a lot of hustle and a lot of assistance, to be honest. Like we worked out the companies we wanted to sell to, the partnerships we wanted, and then we just worked as hard as we possibly could to sell as many of these memberships as possible. And if I look back at our first year, we did actually really, really well. And financially for a business that was 1 year in, we didn't have to raise capital. We bootstrapped it for a year. I think I only put in something like $25,000, which was repaid to me within the first 2 months because we got these partnerships. And that's one thing that's great about these media companies and businesses like this, because we were able to sell exposure. So the partnerships we had, I can't remember the ones we had to start with, but Bell Gully was one, NZTE was another, PwC was another. So we had these amazing companies sponsoring us, getting their brand over all of our videos from day one. And these companies, were paying, very decent amounts of money, some of them up to, $60,000 in cash. And that was generally paid maybe in 2 payments. So when you're a startup and you're getting these huge lumps of cash and you've only got 2 people at this stage, you don't need to go out and raise capital because that allows you to, build your company off that. So those sort of initial cash injections were so helpful. And that partnership model was great. Although I'd say over time, one thing you have to be careful of is you've got to work out how you're going to build a really scalable business, and it's not going to be off the back of commercial partnerships, if that makes sense. So we did a lot of partnership deals and then realized that they were taking up a lot of our time. So we worked really hard on kind of providing an amazing partner experience, but not tailoring everyone super specifically because it just became too hard to manage them all. And, sometimes that would fall over. We weren't doing a great job at certain points. So we've tried to make it so, we're providing an amazing partner experience and we've worked out truly what they want in a commercial partnership. So that was kind of how we did it from the start. And then we just hustled as hard as we could to sell business memberships, sell our B2C individual memberships, and yeah.
How do you then take it to a larger scale? So you move from that business to business approach to a business to consumer approach.
Yeah. So that's the major transition we've been through in the past 5 months now. And we decided to hit B2B on the head and actually get rid of it altogether. So we still have partners, but we don't sell to a company anymore for their staff to access the content. And the reason that is because going into the US, which has 320 odd million people compared to 4 million people here, we were working out exactly who we target, if that makes sense, who was Unfiltered for. And we decided based on, who was our most passionate customers. That's the hustling, hungry entrepreneur sitting in a garage trying to build his or her, first startup, who wants to learn as fast as possible from the best people in the world. And the content you produce for that person is very different to the content you're producing for a middle manager sitting at BNZ wanting to learn about leadership and corporate development. And the big companies, we worked out, wouldn't be wanting to pay for kind of the super entrepreneurial advice. And they're just different markets. So we thought we could do both, but then our messaging comes a bit sort of confused. Who is Unfiltered for? And we ultimately decided that we are for entrepreneurs. So we decided to knock the kind of corporate approach on the head and laser focus on that market. So that was the decision. And then it became about making the platform as B2C friendly as possible. So, originally our subscriptions were 6 months or 12 months for any individual. So all of a sudden it was Netflix, sign up, it's $14.95 a month, cancel anytime, a super easy model for people to subscribe to, high trust. And that was kind of the major transition we made, and then just made every decision for the B2C customer.
And so Netflix, you mentioned there, which is a great comparison. It's all about the content. So when you're looking for America, how do you make sure you've got the content that an American entrepreneur is going to be interested in? How do you get those big American names?
Yeah, that's definitely been hard. And there's no denying that. And I would say if there's one word, it would definitely be persistence. I know so that's my job in the business, is getting these interviews, is tracking down who to interview, trying to secure the interview, schedule it, film it, etc. And it's a process, It's like we'll sometimes email someone 20, 30 times before we actually get the interview. And I know I've got an interview coming up soon with Sarah Blakely, who was the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world, founder of Spanx, an amazing entrepreneur. And I think I've probably emailed her maybe 30 times so far. And then we got an introduction through someone else we interviewed, and she said she'd do it straight away. Previously, I'd never heard back. So, and that's not because she's being rude or not replying. It's just that she's probably not even seeing it. These people get emailed so much, and there's so many different channels that if it comes through the right person, or it's the right introduction, or, maybe you just follow up that one more time, and then that's the time they're going to reply, because they're going to finally give in to that, that passionate kid who just wants the hour-long interview. So it's literally sitting in front of my computer all day long, typing emails, following people up. Every 4 days I send follow-ups. And, I generally will get maybe, if I send 100 emails, maybe 10 would reply on the first one. On the second follow-up, maybe it'd be another 5. Third follow-up, maybe another 5. It's generally about the fourth follow-up where you actually start getting quite a few emails back, because people, I think, to that stage are like, this guy's not going to give in until I give a response. And then people hate saying no, especially when you make the request really easy. So I think if you follow up enough, you're going to annoy them enough that they're going to work out they have to reply either yes or no. And then when they make the decision yes or no, it's generally yes.
And how do you go about with these people who are business people? So they're about the money. They know about their value as well. And you're selling it as part of a commercial product. And they're kind of lending their trade secrets and their brand and stuff to you to then on-sell.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we could commercialize it in other ways. Every media company has their own unique model in which they commercialize content. And for us, we don't have long form kind of ads at the start of every interview where we're promoting other people's products. We try and make it as user friendly as possible. But, there's a subscription. And I think people just understand that in today's day and age, you have to, media is changing so fast, and that people are experimenting with unique models. And I think in the 200, 300 odd interviews I've done for Unfiltered, only maybe one person has ever said that they're not going to do it for that reason. People don't even ask. People want an audience, and if you can prove to them that you've got a valuable audience for them to inspire and educate, I don't think people actually mind about the model. And that's been a really valuable lesson for me, because I used to go into these interviews thinking, or reaching out to people going, no one's going to say yes. We've got this business model. It's like, it's a paywall. People aren't going to want to do that. And like, it's just been wrong, honestly. Like, literally no one seems to care. If you can prove the audience, and then they see who else has done it, right? And we've done some great interviews with the likes of Richard Branson and Don Valentine, the founder of Sequoia, and, the founder of Warby Parker, and these amazing, iconic American entrepreneurs. And people see that, and that's enough due diligence almost for them quite often to be like, look, I want to be a part of that crowd as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Maybe they appreciate, as business people, that everything needs to make $1 as well.
Yeah, as well, absolutely.
Hey, and so when you're looking at the scaling of this company, I mean, that's a very brave move to turn off your currently successful business model, change the focus from your current geography of New Zealand, which is obviously limited in scale, but was working as a business, and then turned it all to the States. How did you do that? Tell me about the investment that you brought on and the change that brought to your company.
Yeah, I think we did it probably too early, to be honest, meaning that I don't regret sort of when we did it, but it was definitely very early on in the journey. And that was because, I always wanted to build a US company and take it offshore. And I've always loved America and wanted to spend more time over there. And, I had this idea and I really wanted to take it there. And I remember one day I went on an experiment called Think Week, which was a Bill Gates developed sort of take a week out of your business and just spend it in nature thinking and reflecting. And I was reading Branson's book again at this point. This is maybe 2 years after I read it for the first time, and thinking, man, I've just gotten a bit safe. Everything was a bit easy. Business was going well. I was living in a nice place in Auckland, and it was just a bit easy. And I remember thinking I need to disrupt my normal and take a big risk. And I went back to Auckland and I got on Skype with a guy called Stephen Jennings, who's a New Zealander who's built cities in Africa and investment banks in Russia. And I was talking to Stephen and he was like, "You've got to get into a bigger market." And I was like, "Yeah, it's a good idea." And I just booked a one-way ticket that night to San Francisco and thought, I'm moving. And it was a month away. And then I made every decision to move. I realized after that you actually have to have a return ticket to get back into the country. But I made a decision to move to America on the spot. And when I say move, I mean go over and spend a large amount of time over there really trying to expand this business into the US market. And, that was only... that was probably only sort of 6 months after we launched Unfiltered, maybe even less, and then just went over and just made a start.
And how's it going now?
Good, yeah. I mean, we've got an office up in New York, and we're sort of filming. From a content perspective, it's becoming easier and easier because we've filmed some amazing interviews recently, and it's just getting a lot easier to secure these incredible interviews in America. I think last time we were over there, we filmed 5 founders of billion-dollar unicorn companies within the space of about a month, and these are all companies that founded within the past sort of 5 to 10 years that have grown to incredible companies. So those interviews are hard to get because these people get hit up all the time, and we filmed about 5 of them in the space of a month. So that just sort of gives you an idea of like the access that we're getting, which is amazing. So the plan is to go over, we're heading over next Sunday, and we've got an interview with Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother, for an hour. We've got Sarah Blakely, who I mentioned. We've got, Brad Keywell, who's co-founded Groupon, Uptake, many billion-dollar companies. So we do have some incredible interviews coming up, and it's just becoming easier to get these interviews, which is awesome.
Tell me about access, because in many ways what you're doing here is the same thing you were doing at Christchurch Boys High, where you're providing access to other people, to the most inspirational and interesting people that you can kind of get hold of. What did those first kind of times of just jumping on the phone and trying to call people, or just reaching out and trying to call people, what did that teach you, and what are you still doing now?
Yeah, I mean, if I look back to the very early interviews we had, it was so hard. Very few people... It wasn't that they weren't willing, it was more just that, what do you show them? You're like, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm trying to achieve. And, everybody's getting hit up for interviews. Everybody wants to interview, these really successful people. And, they have to choose what they say yes to. And when you've got nothing to really show them, it's so easy to say no to it. But we got our first few through, relationships, persistence. I mentioned the speakers program I ran at the school. That was so helpful to go into Umfa because so many of those people I'd built relationships with. So I was able to pick up the phone to, Don Brash and Reese Darby and all these people and say, look, can I just do another interview of you to digitalize what we did at school? And all of those people said yes. So that provided me with kind of my initial base. And then it became about, it's so much easier to get these interviews. So if I had interviews, for example, with Elon Musk, Oprah, all these, Jeff Bezos, all these amazing people, and then went into the US now with like another 10 Bransons on the site, we could probably pretty much get anyone we want because everybody wants to be in that company. And it literally is, I think, that easy quite often is people want to be in the company of other influential business people. And if you can show them, show them that other people are signing up to this. I know in New Zealand now, there's very few interviews that we haven't been able to get. If we approach people that they generally really want to be a part of it, they generally know about us already, and it's, we don't have to do the big spiel as to why they should do it anymore. We just say, look, we're Unfiltered. This is, what we do. Do you want to be a part of it? And generally it's a yes. So I think that's what we're building towards in the US, and it's all about, track record. It's all about viewership. It's all about who else is doing it. Is it reputable? All those things.
They say you should never meet your heroes, but you've Richard Branson, who at 2 times has been a real turning point for you through his book. You went on and met and interviewed him. What was that like?
It was amazing, incredibly. I would say going into it, and if there was one surprise, it wasn't necessarily a bad surprise. I expected probably someone who was a lot maybe larger than life and sort of loud and sort of in your face and sort of, you see this amazing entrepreneur jumping off buildings and doing all these, flying around the world in hot air balloons, and you instantly assume his personality as somebody who's pretty crazy, who's pretty in your face, who's kind of extremely extroverted. Whereas I'd say it's almost the opposite. He's very quite introverted and a very humble person and very personable and kind of listens really carefully. And, he's somebody who was a lot quieter than I expected, but definitely probably more engaging. So, it definitely wasn't disappointing. It was just a bit different to what I expected. And, I've caught up with Richard a couple of times since then, and, we try and keep in contact on email. And, he's obviously an amazing entrepreneur, obviously very busy doing some big things around the world, but he's somebody I still and always will have enormous respect for.
And how do you maintain these relationships? Because you kind of mentioned people like Stephen Jennings, who is an enormous figure, like kind of a man of mystery. He's done so many cool things, and is quite inaccessible to the New Zealand media, and is playing on quite a bigger stage. And your Richard Bransons and all of these figures. How do you make and maintain these relationships?
That's a great question. I think probably the first thing is just by being genuine and not actually, I think people don't see us as a threat. And the reason is because we would never want to publish something that they're not proud of. We would never, ever, ever want to put someone in a difficult position who we interview, because we don't consider ourselves a media company. It is about learning. It's about education. We consider ourselves an ed tech company. And we always say to our interviewees, look, if you want the questions in advance, sure, we'll supply them. If you want, to have the final approval of the interview, sure, you can have that. We never would want to put them in a difficult position. And I think that people trust us due to that. And I know, in the case of people like Stephen Jennings, how do I maintain the relationships? I think just obviously in any given year, you meet so many people and you can't keep in touch with everybody. But the people that we do keep in touch with are generally people who have, showed a lot of interest in us, and we've been interested in what they're doing, and we just got on really well during the interview, and we just make an effort. So I was up in London recently and just sent Stephen a note and just said, look, it'd be great to catch up, and went out to his house and had lunch with him and his wife. And, there's a lot of people we keep in touch with, and, we try and, as Unfiltered, we try and run sort of a bunch of parties every year where we invite every single interviewee we've ever interviewed along, and try and build the community and facilitate connections and community within our own community, if that makes sense. So we do put a lot of effort into that, because I think the network, I hate that word, but kind of the network we've kind of built is obviously very big, and there's obviously a lot of influential, amazing people in that, and we'd like to facilitate those people to talk and meet with each other as well.
I'd like to ask you a couple of the questions that you've asked people in Umfa and across the way as well. Like, what do you wish you'd known earlier? What do you wish you could tell, maybe not you at 18, but your average 18-year-old?
I think probably the most important thing is just what I'd say to your average 18-year-old is it's okay to be a bit disobedient. I think the world that we live in is kind of, you're almost expected to follow a certain career pathway, and you're meant to go to university and finish school and get the highest grade you can, and then get you a degree. And even if you want to start a business, get the degree, because that's security. And once you've got that, it becomes you've always got that to fall back on. Like bits of advice like that are thrown around by every single person, almost, particularly schools. And it's very easy for young people to kind of feel like they have to do this because that's what the school's telling them to do, their parents, the system in general. I always say, like, be disobedient. Just if you want to be an actor and go to LA and give it a crack, just jump on the plane and go and do it. I know that sounds like difficult for some people to do, and it is, but if you're passionate enough about something, I always just say go out and do it. So whenever I talk to young people, I say, like, be disobedient. Actually try not to always listen to instructions, because people are often telling you what they've done themselves. They'll say, and maybe I'm guilty of that sitting here now, giving this advice, but people often say, do this because this is what I did. And I certainly know when I made that decision I was trying to toss up the scholarship decision, my headmaster at the time really wanted me to go to university, and he even said, like, this is what I've done, this is how I've turned out, I'm headmaster of the school, and I did this, and he was sort of telling me about his whole story, and obviously a great guy, but it was very much based off his own experiences. And I think people are generally guilty of that, is sort of giving advice based off their own experience. So I always say to young people, be disobedient, follow your dreams, do the crazy thing, and actually just don't worry about what your parents say. If you piss off your mum and dad, at the end of the day, it's your life, so you have to make those decisions for yourself.
Do you have words that you live by, like mottos or things you tell yourself when things get tough?
Probably the main one is just I think it's an old Disney phrase, keep moving forward. I think that's the most important thing, because, entrepreneurs and people in general have, lives that are roller coasters, that you're sort of up and down all the time, and it's so easy to want to quit when you're, at the bottom of that journey. But if you just take one more step every day by day, hour by hour, make that next call, send that next follow-up email, it will get easier. And I think that's so, so important for people, is just keep moving forward. Don't give up. I know that's cliche, but, I think just you have to just keep one foot in front of the other at all times.
There's one I like that's a bit like that, which is Winston Churchill's, "If you're in hell, keep going."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just less positive, but...
It's a great saying. And I definitely try and live by that. And then the next one is like, this isn't a saying as such, and I mentioned this once in the interview, but the persistence piece is so important. Just bang down doors, People will never say yes on the first go. People will never help you the first time you reach out to them. When I say never, very rarely. Like, you have to keep going and going and going and going and just keep at it. And people will always almost let their guard down eventually. There's very few people that won't. I've met a few of them. Graham Hart's one. Obviously, he hasn't done an interview since 2005. He certainly hasn't done an interview of me, and probably never will with anybody, and I respect that. The amount of times I've emailed his assistant and harassed her and dropped stuff in his mailbox, and you just have to keep going sometimes.
As a final thought there, tell me about, you're already doing some giving back, which is something that people often wait till quite late in their careers to get amongst, but you've started doing some work with Lifeline and fundraising. Yeah.
So it's been a busy time up in the US, as I mentioned, doing all these interviews, but came down to New Zealand for 3 weeks to really focus on three things. The first was this work with Lifeline, and, when I learned that New Zealand had the worst youth suicide rate in the developed world, obviously that's a shocking statistic, and it's something obviously we're not proud of as a country. And I wanted to do my part in kind of solving that, or helping fix that, I should say. And obviously it's a small part, it's a massive problem, but I think the more people that can kind of get behind it, the better. So organised a fundraising dinner, and we sold tickets at $5,000 a head, and we raised $55,000 over this first dinner. The plan was originally to raise $100,000 over a year. So for the first dinner to raise $55,000 was amazing. And we've got our second one coming up in February, March this year. We've had Helitrans donate 2 helicopters flying over to Waiheke, trying to raise $40,000 there, which is going to be great as well. So would love for some of the listeners to take a look at that. So that's definitely been something I've been working on. The other thing as well is came back to do a half marathon. So doing the Queenstown half marathon next week, which is I'm excited about. It's the first time I've sort of done something like this. So I've been training really hard for that as well. And then the third thing is we're working on sort of version 2 of Unfiltered at the moment. So came down here to meet with the team and sort of talk about the next steps of Unfiltered. And we've been spending a lot of time working out how Unfiltered can become much more of a learning platform, sort of powered by artificial intelligence, and been spending some time with Huawei down here as well, sort of talking about, what they're doing, leading the way in artificial intelligence with their new Mate 10 smartphone. So that's sort of some stuff I've been working on down here at the moment.
I see. Well, looking forward to seeing where you take that next. How can people actually find out a little bit more about the Lifeline fundraising?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn's probably the best way. I post regularly on LinkedIn, and when we have the details of the next dinner in terms of date and so on, we'll be doing a post out inviting people to, just send me a message if they're interested in coming to that. This one will be a little bit less head price, a little bit cheaper than the last one, but we've got a great group of people already committed to that, which is going to be great.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jake Millar, CEO of Unfiltered. Follow him on LinkedIn to keep up with the details. Thank you, Jose Barbosa, for producing, and thank you for listening. If you are a fan of the spin-off podcasts, you can now find them on Spotify.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound, and brought to you by The Spin-Off and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tamaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt.cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.